call it out. They know they're going to act mean and irritated. Especially they don't even want to act nice. They're going to understand. They don't understand. You're doing the best. You're doing the best you can, and they're just.
I did not realize I was on cam already. And look who we have. I gotta get this music off. All right, there it is. And of course, Sartori, you come on looking like that, you know what happens. You get the full screen. Wait, why isn't it letting me do this? Oh, wait, because I got to do it up here. Solo layout. What's up, big dog?
So, I find out the rules and I exploit them. That's what I do. So,
I mean,
learner,
that's the reason for the rules.
Yep.
Is so that people will learn how to take advantage of them. I think Paul said that. Well, what's on your mind, Mr. Sartori?
Man, that was I wonder what the end of that video was, like if the guy was ever going to get there, like because the thing is that so these super rich people, that friends of Epstein, they have the same discussion. They just don't waste their mental time focusing on tea and coffee. They talk about the perverted equivalent of what that is, of the perverted equivalent of only the tips of the green buds. That's their game.
So you think that it's that they their taste or that muscle of like discernment is being used in a different arena, not that
it's way stronger than ours. It's way stronger than ours, and it's for a very elite category. Like, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like it's just that hideous strength. The inner ring, Lewis sketch. Like it's like you're always going into the smaller and smaller circles, and until you cross that line where it's like it gets into all the soul destroying stuff, and then even within there's a new like hierarchy, and I mean that's like classically well known just facts of life, about how evil operates in the universe and stuff. Like, but you can have. I mean, it's good to have those tastes. It's smart if you do it at cheap things like tea and coffee, because you realize like, hey, this is a fun way for me to be elite in this small arena that I can afford.
I think you've said a lot there.
Yeah.
And I was only half listening to the video because I was focusing more on the beat. But I don't know. I couldn't tell if he was trying to say that like elites look down on lower classes and their tastes, or was he saying that the rich, like that taste is something that should be like universal and democratic or something? Like what was?
Yeah. Well, so I think he really was confusing a thing. I think it might have been Aaron Wren that said it, or it could have been him talking about something that Rob Henderson said. It was one of those guys. But like they made this very clear distinction between elites and experts, because experts are the ones that like go all in on one subject, and they know like all the technical reasons about why something is the best. There's like some echo going on. I don't know if that's just.
That's my bad, bro.
Oh, it wasn't the most distracting echo, so I was ignoring it.
Yeah, it's just because I don't use headphones.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So like that, like experts, it's like Fauci or something, but then the elites are like Donald Trump, and obviously he's not
famous for his high taste.
He's not famous for his high taste, but he's very much an elite because he focuses on like the categories that are of most importance. And like
he wants his McDonald's in gold, please.
Yeah. Well, no, but the McDonald's thing is actually a perfect example. It's synonymous with the whole Maxwell House coffee, because it's like he does not want to have to use any more brain cells than he needs to spare, to think about getting calories into his body. So it's reliable. It's cheap.
I think he genuinely likes it.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it tastes good. I mean, but that's the thing. It's like you don't get to run the country if you're thinking about like all this fine dining stuff. And even it's like, what's his name? Gavin Newsom there got in trouble for getting caught at the French Laundry. But it's like he's not really there for the food. He's there for the lack of poor people. So like that is, and I think that's probably where the things get confused, is because a lot of times like elite people and like will have these things that we associate with good taste, but like whereas we would be like, this is a restaurant that I'm going to save up for and I'm going to go to once a year on vacation. For them, this is a restaurant that I can reliably assume will be free of weirdos and poor people that'll try to come up and take their picture with me. So like it's the same thing. They're using it for totally different purposes, though.
Tunji says, bad taste is a sign of moral degradation. That was the point. The coffee and tea were metaphors.
Yeah, but well, that's the thing though. But you can have. It's like, it's not poor taste if you realize that you don't care about having. Like, you can't have good taste in every domain of your life. Well, you can try. That's the TV show Frasier, a classic.
Well, yeah, you can tell this by the varying tastes in music, etc. in the corner. So there's some people who listen to some real weird, some music I wouldn't necessarily listen to. But speaking of which, I don't know what he listens to, but I bet I would only like half of it. It's our good buddy Nico, and with Nico we can pop the V&A bubble. Welcome, Nico.
Thank you.
What you thinking about?
I think the use of elite is kind of an unfortunate mistake. I think it's making more of a case for quality. Because elite implies that there is a separation, between the common people and the elite, which I don't think it's a bad thing in of itself, but I don't think what he was talking about in the video was exactly about this separation between the best and the not so best.
Well, I mean, this is like, I'm not saying that the word obviously has like lots of different connotations. But I mean, I think one way you could put it in the mindset of is like, okay, so if you work for a company or something, and you might have somebody who is like the best in a technical field, they are an expert. But if they move to management, even though they're the best, they're the most expert in that technical field, once they go to managing the team, they might be a very bad manager because the technical expertise they have is not translate to them being able to lead a team well. Whereas the manager has a skill of dealing with people they're kind of able to look at things in a more abstract, zoomed out sense rather than focusing on the particulars. And they can actually make use of the expertise of other people. So they might rely on the guy who's the expert and say, who's the best person to put this job on? You know more about this stuff than I do. And that person can give that feedback. So they make use of expertise, but that is the elite mindset. So it can happen in lots of different like domains or whatever. Like,
good night, Tunji. Thank you for sharing this weird video with us all. What was coming to mind, Michael, as you were talking, was something like maybe in a perfect world, all of our elites are there by consequence of their competence and generosity and reciprocal, the agreements being men of their word, women of their word, that's the kind of ideal that the best people would have the most resources and would use it in the best way possible. In that ideal, it makes sense to me that the elites would set the aesthetic tone for all of society. That it would make sense in the ideal world for the opinions of aesthetics or tastes and quality, like across all dimensions, would almost like by definition you would want to look towards the elite of that society to understand what the society thought about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's like yeah, and it's probably it varies very widely across different applications. Like the fact that they're talking about the provisions on Epstein Island, which is like a place of only, like, once you're there, you realize I am in a very exclusive circle of eliteness, and you're not gonna like anybody that's like striving is not going to be thinking about the coffee and complaining about it. And none of the elite people probably care about the coffee. But any of those people, if they were going to do some public facing thing, they're throwing a gala or something, they're going to go find a coffee nerd and be like, you're in charge of the coffee, spend however much you have to, make sure everybody says this is the best coffee we've ever had in our life. And then they'll do the same thing for the wine people and whoever else, because then they are actually like interacting with people that have discriminating tastes in those other areas. But, Epstein Island is about one thing or two things or something, But,
is there an aspect, because when he was talking about the Maxwell piece, to me it almost came across as a little bit of like a manosphere take of like the real elite players, they don't care what coffee they're drinking, but they'll drink the coffee of like a business partner, because that's what is more important, is like sustaining those business relationships and, getting to the top. And speaking of business relationships, welcome, Yoav. Oh, no. Oh, gosh, this is not. Let's see, I got to add you. Why can't I add you? What is going on? My StreamYard, I'm going to have to refresh. Bear with me. Let me hit some branding. Actually, if you guys want to talk, somebody just start talking, but I got to refresh here and get Yoav in here.
I don't know, Michael, about the thing about the elites. Don't you think that the someone who is really an elite, they would know themselves what the best coffee is? And then if somebody came up with some proposition of using this or that, and it wasn't up to their level, they would reject it.
They might. It depends on if they like coffee or not. Like the thing is that there's definitely a selection of things that they basically say, I don't have any time for this at all. And like we all kind of do that to some degree, but like, but even that in that way, like the elite person might be like, because you'll have this thing in the movies, where they like tell the person like this super specific like way to make their coffee, and so it's like maybe they'll do that if they care. In their day-to-day life, it's like they have the assistant that always makes them the coffee exactly the way they want it, and it might be a very good way to make coffee, but what they do. But like that, it is the offloading of decision making, because that's something that we all have a limited capacity for. So like once you get to a place where you're like have a very particular taste in something, you can have it like regularly, or you can be discriminating, but they're not probably thinking about I want to try all the best coffee shops in a new city and try and see what's new, like, because that's just not a way that they would value their time.
I'm going to leave some space for Yoav. I know.
I would like to share with you some of the wisdom of the Hebrew sages. And they asked the question, what is the measure of a man? How do you measure a man? And they say by three things. And it's open to interpretation like any translation of Hebrew. Three things: koso, kiso, v'ka'aso. Koso, his cup. A man is measured by what he drinks and how he drinks it. Kiso is pocket. And Ka'aso is temper. How well he behaves and hold himself. Koso, kiso, Ka'aso.
So what he drinks, and I guess maybe also eats, so how good he takes care of his own body, how deep are his pockets, so how proficient maybe, what kind of skill they have, they can acquire things, so they are able to get things done in the world. And their temper, they're not ruled by their emotions, maybe something like that. Or how much do they know, how much do they understand?
As I said, open to interpretation.
Well, I mean, I would say, it's if you're going to be elite in something or expert in something, there are better and worse choices to make. So obviously the richest people in the world had to make very particular choices about what they focused on and what they ignored to get there. And what they achieved is impressive, but is that a goal that's something we should all be striving for? Probably not. We don't know how happy they are. I mean, I think, I think in some ways it's like being able to have taste and discrimination in the simpler things of life is a very virtuous thing to do, because then you can have a very elite kind of experience on a regular basis. And it'll lead you to contentment. So.
But I think that goes without saying. It's
yeah, well, I think that guy just was obsessed with coffee and tea and books in like a way that he's not seeing. He is missing a bigger picture thing that's going on. I mean, the books is probably the more impactful part of the discussion, because books shape much more of your life than your morning beverage choice.
Well, how about for food? Everybody can agree that there are healthier and unhealthier foods. For example, isn't there something similar to that phenomena in music or movies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's across the board. So it just depends on what is most important to you. Like, because it takes a lot more time. It takes research. It takes effort if you're going to like do all the healthiest eating and stuff. So, any time spent in anything is time taken away from something else. I mean, I think it's the weirdest part is that we like to have competitions about it instead of being like, I'm so glad that you're an expert on coffee because I don't know very much about it at all. Why don't you pick my coffee order for me? Like,
but here's the thing. I'm not sure that. Okay, this may be a little out of topic, but one of the things I heard about the building of bureaucracy and the modern state was that these noble aristocrat elites had people to manage parts of their state. And it arrived the point where these people who were under these noblemen became more powerful than they. I don't know if elite people really do delegate like that. Maybe
Well-
it's something more from our own times.
I think that I think that the best leaders do that, and I think that I think that like the best way for our culture to run would be for people like, like if you think about like if it's a monarchy and you have the king that can step aside before he dies is in a lot of ways like creating a better culture, because then he is like he's able to put his trust into the next generation, like in a very tangible way. And yeah, it means he doesn't have the same power anymore, and maybe he has to be, he has to be reminded, like, hey, don't try to grab hold the reins anymore. You've stepped aside, because I think that that's the thing, and that's like even what parents should be trying to do with their kids. It's like you don't want to just like you could just. It's not just to protect your kids and make sure nothing bad ever happens for them. If you're not helping them to grow into a adult role where they could like replace you, then you are kind of failing in some way. That's my kids are my only serious retirement plan, honestly. So it's like I kind of have to make sure that I raise them to be competent enough so that they can take care of me someday, and make sure that our relationships stay healthy and intact.
Okay, I would also like to bring an example from the Japanese culture. What happened in Japan is you had an emperor, and there was the court of the emperor, and there were the elite, and they were rich. And then there was a political upheaval, and the real power moved to the shogun, the vice emperor. And there was still elite at the emperor's palace. They have not decapitated the emperor and the palace and the royal family has remained. And they has remained as elite, but without the access to power and money as they used to have before. Mm-hmm. And therefore they have developed a particular modest, tasteful culture. One of the famous aspects of it is the tea ceremony that is refined and subdued, does not advertise wealth, but advertise taste.
Very similar to the way the British monarchy has gone too.
Hello, the young Levite. I was explaining to them before the saying, על שלושה דברים אדם ניכר על כיסו וכעסו. If you want to expand on that, you're invited.
Yeah, get in here, Hezi. Get in here, brother. Or feel free to, see what we're talking about. Join in a second. I had to step away to go to the restroom. Can someone catch me up to like the last 2 minutes or so? Are we still talking elites?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have nothing to say about elites at this time. Please continue.
Our most famous coffee brand in Israel is called Elite, which is a smart marketing move.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about that move is that some of this is about being separated from common people, looking like you're special. But there is a different discussion about the quality of things. What things are actually better. that's a different discussion.
I mean, your opinion would be that they aren't necessarily better, right, Nick?
Well, my opinion is that some things are better than others.
Okay, keep your secrets.
It's just like with food. Some food is healthier. It creates a healthier body. And some food will take you to an early grave. It's there is this idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, blah, blah, blah. Every time I'm trying to create something that has some art to it, I have to decide, well, do I make a line here or do I make a line here? I'm all the time trying to, okay, no, this is bad. Erase it. No, this is good. I'm always trying to get the better thing. I'm much more comfortable arguing for the better than for the elite.
Yeah,
although I
that's a
could
good
make
way.
an argument for that.
I think, yeah. Well, I think like the original. It's interesting because if you think about like how these kind of leader positions arise, whether it's like in feudalism or something like that, or the way that the universities were originally intended that like people would learn a broad variety of things. And it was like the leader needed to have some level of expertise across a broad domain, number of domains, because he has to communicate the vision to like the people below him, and they might be experts. They might know more than him in a lot of things, but the amount of things that he's the amount of different types of people that he's over is so broad. And it is like the better idea is a good thing. Like it's weird how it's become like a elite, as in like the best in the world, kind of most exclusive. The disconnect from like the normal person or whatever that word has kind of come to take on. And especially because like how do people get into these positions of power and influence? It's not like the guy that builds a company from a ground up, like who actually knows what all the roles are. It's just like somebody comes in as a CEO of a company because they went to school for CEO stuff, and then they get, it's just like it's a totally different experience.
Yeah. And I heard this argument before, and that elites and the people used to be much closer to each other. But I do think there is a kind of hiding for people to accept someone as their superior. There is a kind of hiding yourself in a faraway place so that they can imagine that you are so much greater that you really are. So I guess it's like the two roads for the elite is that you can be flashy and let people's imagination imagine you to be better than you really are. Or you can be flashy in the sense that you're so much better at something that people get really, really impressed with your performance.
Yeah, I just shared a thing, just so you know, because it's weird. I have this weird relationship with like elitism or whatever, because I had some exposure to it with relatives and stuff that were like in that weird upper crust world, and it's like I think the funny thing is that really like the funny thing about that video is that really it is exactly the same as like the kind of petty stuff that other people argue about. It's just that they argue about different things. They have a different set of like things that they care about, and which is to say, I mean, I would say in some sense they're not really elite. So yeah. So I guess the real problem is that our like signifiers are broken. Like somebody being wealthy or having a position in government or in a business world is not like an indicator of very much, really. Maybe about their competency in some areas, but not even necessarily. It's just a lot of it is circumstantial, and or it might be an indication that they actually have bad character, as you know, corruption tends to choose things or whatever. So.
Nico, do you have any connections to the quote-unquote elite? Do you consider yourself an elite? Guess same question to you, Yoav. Do you consider yourself elite or an expert on anything?
Expert I am. I'm an expert on color.
On color?
Yeah.
Huh? Are you a painter?
No, but I work in a 3D printing company when we print models of things like little statues. And I'm responsible of setting the color of those things we print so they become more accurate. It could be like models of action heroes, of industrial products like toothbrushes or dentures. All sorts of things that you want the color to come out right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm no artist, just an expert.
You know, that kind of gets me thinking, because I guess I know a thing or two about my own crafts, but I guess the problem with the word elite is that it's kind of mixing two things at the same time. It's like noble and expert joined together.
Yeah, it's a bit different with the Jews. With the Jews, the experts are the elite. Experts in reading, the expert in the Bible. I mean, it doesn't your background or riches is insignificant. What is significant is, can you quote the Bible cover to cover?
They used to have other kinds of elites, but the Romans killed them.
Yeah, things happen after that as well. But
yeah,
with the Jews, your expertise is what makes you the elite. Alas, not necessarily in color. Color expertise doesn't count for so much.
See, you know how to tell the difference between a free man and a slave, it's in the eyes. So the free man looks to the front and to the sides, looking for prey and for threats. While the slave looks down to his work. And because he's looking down, he doesn't see the threats coming. So the free man is always on the lookout for attacks or for something an advantage to find. He's always looking into all the other places. Well, the slave is concentrated on one thing. This is why I separated the thing of elite and expert. Because you have like people that are like street thugs, people who live from crime. And these are very poor people, not very well read, maybe not even very smart, but they do have one thing in common, that they are always looking. And that's what they do. They don't have a job, because having a job would mean that they can't be looking. And that they find things like that beneath them. Like they would be ashamed to do something like that. Even though it's mostly poor people. And the funny thing is that somebody who does have a job and maybe earns a lot of good money, it's easy pickings for a person like that. Because even though they have good money, the guy that's a criminal and he's always on the lookout, in a way, he has nothing to lose. And in another way, he's used to being in the fight. Well, somebody who works, maybe they wouldn't have what it takes to defend their own. And so there is an imbalance here.
Yeah.
And when you're not looking at it, when the person at work is not looking, there is a chance that somebody who is looking at them is going to move in and take over and put the tax on you.
Okay. Tom asks whether no idle rich in Israel. First, it brings the question to what extent Israel is a Jewish state. Leave this aside. The most iconic story in Jewish society is the daughter of the idle rich man marries the clever poor rabbi.
Mm.
And about slaves, I haven't seen so many slaves in my life, so cannot comment about how they behave. But it is the common theory of right brain and left brain that yes, any human being, half of the brain looks for the threats and half the brain looks for opportunities.
Yeah. So, and that is a good way to split it. And the thing is that you gain a significant advantage when people are allowed to be more expert in both of those things, like your worker, because if everybody has to do both equally, you don't get the same level of expertise. So in some ways, like maybe, I don't know if it's exactly the right brain, but the person who's able to focus on social connections, assessing those threats, being a leader, if they put that towards protecting the people that are the workers who might be expert in the different fields and they value their input and things like that, that's like a really strong community system. I think some of the problems we have that develop is that we tend to think like that elites beget elites, and that slaves like only beget slaves, where it seems like people can and do pop up from in unexpected ways and unexpected places, and it's then dependent on how good the kind of culture is at sorting people or helping people to find their strengths, because definitely to have those different ways of doing things work together is better than having them at odds.
I was thinking about how this relates, and I'd love your take on this, Nico. How this relates to us being servants of Christ. I'm reminded of like the intro to James, and this is the Protestant view, so forgive me, but the idea that Jesus' biological brother calls him Lord and himself a servant of him in the first verse of James. I wonder, like, what does it say about where we should be looking and where to keep our eyes in our service or slavery of Christ? Any thoughts?
I would like to interrupt. We have the case of Abraham sending his slave to find a bride for his son. A slave sometimes can be quite a clever and intelligent person.
Yeah, it used to be that in let's say the classical age, to be a lawyer, you could have a slave that's a lawyer. In a lot of places, it worked more basically like a job, and the slave market was almost like a job market. There were all kinds of experts that were slaves, and maybe somebody would buy a slave, then they would pay for a tutor, they would learn something that was really, really complex, that you had to be smart to learn it. And then once they are learned, they would go back and sell them again. But now they are a slave that knows, I don't know, law or something. Yeah.
I think you probably also could make a similar case with the thing about like husbands and wives, because there's a lot of the thing in the traditional way of thinking, like that the man is supposed to be the head of and the woman is supposed to submit or whatever. You look at that chapter, Proverbs 31, where it talks about like the wife of noble character, and she's doing all sorts of like incredible stuff. And it's really that the husband, it's not saying she's doing this in opposition to her husband's command or whatever, but he's the leader that's wise enough to recognize her abilities and give her the free reign to do what she does best. And then he's still going to come in there and protect her. And, maybe he's the one that procures some of the raw material of the land and things like that or whatever. There's, he's playing a role in that, but it's like, it's the idea that like, the head and the body, well, if the head's always concerned about keeping the body from not misbehaving or whatever, the body's not going to accomplish very much. But if the head can trust the body to do what the body knows how to do well, they're both more productive and better off. So,
yeah, that's why.
So one of the things that comes up for me as you're explaining that, though, is the way in which both this in the kind of paradigm of like slave perspective versus master perspective in terms of like what you're looking at, like out towards opportunity or up, or I can't remember exactly where, the down basically at yourself, or possibly directly at the master in order to anticipate his desires, kind of a thing. But what struck me about what you said, Michael, was the idea. It's almost like the Christian idea of the difference between the leaves of the tree versus the fruit of the tree. And we're supposed to judge the tree by its fruit, or the tree will be judged by its fruit rather than its leaves.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, this is Kierkegaard that I'm channeling now, but there's a sense in which oftentimes the same actions can be done for completely different reasons. And I get the sense that there's almost like, what would be the distinction then in like a man who's just like working for his boss and trying to be a good employee so that he can accumulate wealth and impress women, and like, you know, there's all these good side effects of like, yeah, and then maybe he could like, there's what I'm trying to point to, I guess, is a certain way in which I'm trying to point towards something different or deeper in the distinction that Nico first made as it pertains to being a slave to Christ, because the verse that keeps coming up for me is the idea is serve your earthly masters as unto the Lord. And there's this weird way in which serving my master is serving the Lord. And so serving my master as unto the Lord looks the same way as just serving my master well. And I think that's, yeah, I don't know. There's something to be said about that. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, you know, that's interesting because, you know, think about like, what does he say to Peter? What does Jesus say to Peter? He says to Peter, feed my sheep. And so Jesus is saying, like, you're mine, the sheep are mine. Your job is to take care of the sheep. So Peter's job is more leadership intensive than the sheep's job. And you know, in some ways, it's like the main thing about being a leader or being in control is that you actually have to take responsibility for the people beneath you. Like, and that's like healthy, a healthy way that the kingdom is supposed to operate. If you're always worried about like managing them instead, like to manage their risk or their, you know, keep them from error, if that's more important than you like feeding them and let them figure stuff out, then you're not really doing it the right way. You know, but I think, you know, because some of it's like, well, it's where the new shepherds are going to come from in that system. Some of them come from being sheep or whatever. So it's like, you know, I think there is like, maybe, you know, that is kind of like the aspect of like theosis or something, sanctification. Even we usually think about it as becoming more holy, less sinful, more like in a moral sense, but I think it also has to be an aspect of becoming more responsible and more productive. Even like if you look at that parable of the talents, you know, it's like, yeah, it was the guy that produced the most profit that got in charge of the most stuff, and the other guy was in charge of less stuff. And the guy that didn't do anything, he was really trying to be like holy and not make a mistake, and he got punished pretty bad because that wasn't the point. So, or I mean, it wasn't the point for him. Like he was supposed to be a leader because he was entrusted with that responsibility, and he didn't live up to it.
Right. That almost speaks to something like, because again, I want to zero in on what should be one's attention as a slave, because like go ahead, Yoav. What do you think?
We were reading maybe the 5th chapter of Kings on Thursday, and I think you have your exact answers about being a slave or being a worker, because it describes how Solomon, the wisest man ever, how he organized his country and actually the whole of the Middle East. And as the chapter described it, he recruited or he conscripted a large part of the population to engage in large projects like building the temple. And he engaged the people of the Lebanon in cutting the trees for the temple. And there's a lot of food that needs to be provided to feed all of those people. So somebody My guess in Syria was growing the wheat for everybody. As the chapter, the words that the chapter describes is the word that we use at the time. It described them as the slaves of Solomon, and that he has appointed masters over those slaves. But I think this is more like a modern globalist economy, when he actually kept the people employed and he kept the people well fed, and there was peace and prosperity also the Middle East through trade, and talented managers were appointed to people well fed, and there was peace and prosperity also the Middle East through trade.
Oh,
Had to mute Sartori. Looks like he accidentally unplugged his headphones when he got up. But yeah.
I finished.
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay, good. Nick, what were you gonna say?
so I don't think there is such a huge difference from slave, servant, employee. There are lots of variations between these looking down or looking to the sides, to the front. Because the thing is that there is a lot of, in this kind of libertarian world of talking about freedom and all of that. Well, here's the problem with freedom. It has to be maintained constantly. You can't be looking down. You always have to be looking to the sides all the time. If you're really serious about being a sovereign citizen or whatever, then no more watching TV, no more playing games, no more doing your thing. Also, no more working a job. Don't work a job. No. All of your time has to go into basically politics and conflict.
So here's the thing: is what you're describing. Kierkegaard also describes quite well as anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And so, and you're right to say that one of the ways in which people engage or try to numb this anxiety is with a type of misdirected expertise or application of discernment, which would be towards the end of one's pleasure, one's own pleasure, right? Whether it be, and you can be as sophisticated as you want with your pleasure, whether it's like Mozart or a romance novel. But yeah, so keep going. I didn't mean to completely stop you, just to put up the Kierkegaard flag that, yeah, like I'm grokking what you're talking about from a slightly different angle, but please proceed.
Okay. I think I can see now the angle where you were coming from, because yeah, that's right. If you're just looking for more exquisite pleasures, you're not a free man, you're a slave. You're completely missing the point. But here is the other side of that coin, which is that you can't hold a mountain over your head with your arms. At some point, you're not free. You'll never be completely free. You're not Superman, you're not God. At some point, you have to actually be a servant. Bend the knee and look down. It's just a performance that you'll never be able to completely succeed at.
Right. There's something that I want to say, which is that, like, I think when you assume what you say about, like, there not being that much difference between a slave and a servant and an employee and that kind of thing. And even to the point of Yoav pointing out some of the ways in which, or at least this is one of the pieces I got from it, which is like there is a sense in which when you have a good master, he kind of, and examples of this in the Bible are usually like good masters using their slaves well, or like guiding their servants well, and that this is kind of what it means to be a good servant, is to kind of obey good orders, kind of a thing. um and to kind of serve, it ultimately comes down to this idea of service, I suppose. But the problem is, once again, um if Christ is calling us to a type of servitude, that can't mean that he's calling us to like look down or to look at ourselves constantly, right? Like, and even in the Old Testament, to be a servant of God is what is that dynamic that neither looks down, because basically, is he saying you need to be a servant who looks around like a master, or do you need to be a servant who looks up and allows the kind of the outside view for essentially for God to take care of what he can't see or what he's not looking at? So that would be where I'd want to, maybe point to. But there's also a sense where, and I think different different traditions probably even see this slightly differently. But it's kind of like, what is your perspective to service, and combined with what is your actual perspective on where you exist in the hierarchy, right? So it sounds like to me like you would want to make, Nico, two separate points. One would be essentially that, um basically what you just said, that like you're in this condition where you're forced to serve, like you basically, the Bob Dylan, you got to serve somebody. And so there's and it's not good to be a slave to one's passions. And so then the question arises, what is it good to serve then? If I have to serve somebody, where, who do I serve? And for a Catholic, that kind of becomes, you serve Christ through serving the church in some real sense. um I think for more individualistic people or more Protestant spirit, maybe even some Orthodox, the service is meant to be a direct line from you to Christ, to the Father, kind of a thing. And this is James too, right? Like a servant of God and of Christ Jesus, the Messiah. And so, yeah, what do you make of that? And also, Michael, welcome back. Feel free to if you want to check your mic or something, but feel free to riff.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Michael, don't you want to go? Okay. Isn't there something similar between looking up and looking down? If you're looking at what you worship, that the center of your attention, what's around it, it loses focus. You're not so aware of the things that are around you. So that also makes you vulnerable. There could be a threat to the sides and you wouldn't know. But notice that it's kind of similar to like being a soldier in an army. There's a big flag. And the idea of the big flag is that you would know where everybody is. So you know that you have to follow that flag. So you'll be looking up in the midst of danger, which normally would be a kind of a threat. But in being so united, there is a protection that you have. So both looking down and looking up, it makes you vulnerable. But looking up gives you something more that looking down doesn't give you.
I think that Michael Sartori actually may have connected the dots for me with just his fatherly affection on display, because I do think that it's probably the right moment to kind of interject. And this isn't exclusively a Christian notion, but the idea of our being sons of God, whether by adoption or by selection in the Jews' case. But like, there is that sense in which children, as they're growing up, they watch their parents, and then their parents point out the things that the kids need to be aware of, right? That there's this, the good child looks to their parent and trusts that their parent is going to point to salient things. And if it weren't the case, then children wouldn't be able to develop whatsoever, right? Um, and of course, they're not thinking this thought like, I'm looking to my, maybe some of them are. If Marcher's still listening, he was probably this type of kid who was like, I am, looking beyond my parents as, as they point towards uh, salient, relevant information that is trustworthy in some sense. And so I wonder, to again blow that back up to the image of God, if there's a sense in which if you look up, that's when like God will direct your attention to, for like, to just put it as bluntly as possible, the neighbor you are meant to love, right? Like that's, if you are looking to God, the thing that he will most likely show you is the neighbor in need of love. Sometimes he will look, sometimes he'll tell you something else. But Michael, you got to go. You want to have a final word?
Sure, I will take the final word. Yeah, in some sense, it is kind of like such an odd question or whatever, but like for both Jews and Christians, the thing is that God has a plan for creation, but for some reason he's chosen to mediate that plan through humankind. But he is our father, so he is like, in a sense, he worked for a week and then he retired. He created the world and then he retired, and he's there to back us up or to set us up for when we need to. But like it's that trust that he puts us in charge of things, and his trust and patience, much like King David, is kind of like he's way more hesitant to intervene, it seems like, a lot of times, even than we're comfortable with. Like, we would like it if he would step in and take over more often than he does, but I think part of that is because the purpose is for us to become more like him. So yeah, it is very much a fatherly and kingly kind of role that he's raising us towards.
That's also James 1, right? Like, rejoice in your sufferings because it produces steadfastness, which it essentially, the thesis of the argument is that the steadfastness, when it's had its full effect, produces the type of perfection that makes us worthy to be called sons of God, kind of a thing. That it's actually when our faith is tested in some real sense is when we're being provided the circumstances to become worthy of adoption, even though, and again, the already not yet aspect is also firing like fireworks last night in my brain right now. But I want to thank you, Sartori, for joining and getting this combo started. It looks like we've got some good fodder for edifying thought and conversation. So I appreciate it. Oh, we just lost Chris.
Yeah.
Well,
I would like also to say my last contribution for tonight.
Well, once you leave, it'll just be me and Nico, and we'll just argue about something. I'm sure of it.
It's past 11 p.m. here.
All right, excuses. We'll let you slide this time.
Yeah. So if you would like to see how would the human look like if they were more faithful to their master, or to the contrary, how would the human be like if they took no masters at all? This is why we have dogs and cats. Cats are slaves to nobody.
I don't know. I consider my cats my servants, but they're probably more like like I have all female cats. So sometimes I like to think of them as like my, like I'm King Solomon, and they're like the closest thing I have to concubines, even though obviously I want to avoid all of the gross implications of that, but just in personality only. They kind of don't like each other, but they're always trying to like get my attention so they can get their belly rubs or get like snacks. But anyway, I feel like I may have overexposed myself with that comment.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Yoav. Sorry I had to end that way.
Furry confirmed.
Yeah, I went full McWoke furry style. Oh goodness, Michael, get us back on track. I do want to put back on the table for conversation though the idea and maybe even the kind of absurdity or the conflict of the differing metaphors and how they kind of, you know, I think we're also kind of just circling an idea of what it means to be in Christ in some sense, especially now that our Jewish brother has left us. We can kind of speak candidly about who's the most important of all. Um, but all that stuff aside, I really do wish Hezi would jump on because one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is kind of this dynamic or trinamic you've got with the like servant, child, and lover. I was reading on for reasons that I will leave to God. I in the past month or so I read both Song of Solomon and Hosea, um, which I think are a really good like back to back read, especially when you because for me the point of that was to try to kind of pay a little bit more attention to the aspect of God as lover of our soul. Because I do think that oftentimes we have an easier time talking, especially in public, about God as Father and God as Master. And I think that one of the things that makes Christianity so compelling is kind of the scandal of God as lover. And this is as simple, and you can see this in a famous of a verse as John 3:16, right? It was for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And I'm not trying to confuse agape, phileo, eros, any of that. I'm not trying to actually confuse those in any way, and I'm not really interested in a rehashing of the differences. Um, I'm more so trying to point to the way in which, like, if you don't kind of you err. It seems like to me you potentially err if you think of if you only think one of those images or one of those signs, right? If you have as a Christian only think God is Father, there's there's some problems with that, and there are complications with that. If you only think of God as Master, there ends up being some problems and some complications with that. If you only think of God as Lover, there ends up being seemingly some complications and some errors with that. And so I want to know both of you guys' takes, and welcome, Michael. Feel free to also input what you probably came on to talk about. But let's start with Nico and then go to Michael. But I'd love you guys' feedback on what I just laid out.
Okay. It, there is a dynamic that is common to all of those. Isn't there something similar between master and lover? But, although,
It's dangerous waters. I don't know if we want to go that far. But yes, there's of course obvious connections between master and lover. But I don't want to, this is a PG-13 stream as far as I'm concerned.
okay. Well, I'm trying to remember the name of the movie.
50
Help me
Shades of
out.
Grey? Is that what you're thinking of? 50 Shades of Grey?
No, almost. But no. So it was this movie about some kids going to one of these like military academies, and they are like problem kids. This is like a 90s 2000s movie, and they get a hard-boiled sergeant from the army that for some reason they try to get rid of him and stuck him in this military school. And the guy has like I don't know how it's called in English. It's like a gap between his two teeth. It's like a black sergeant. And there's this dynamic of the movie where the kids are unruly, and then this sergeant guy, oh, there it is, Major Payne. Yeah, that's the one. So there is this dynamic where in the beginning they don't respect him. They are just normal rebellious kids and stuff like that. And he is kind of stuck up. He is not a very humorous person, but by the end, there is this thing of, he believed in these kids and he made the difference. But there is this weird thing that you mentioned, Magno. I think it's in that movie. And it's not just in that movie, that's just one example. But there is a bunch of these movies, these genres of military training. It's not, I'm a soldier in an army. It's, I'm a recruit learning to become part of the troop. So here's the funny thing. There is always this scene where one of the recruits thinks he is above all of this. And he doesn't respect the sergeant. And then he makes some kind of trick. He tries to pull one over the sergeant. And either it works, but he gets caught, or the sergeant manages to undo the rules. And then it becomes this, so you thought that you were going to get rid of me or get one over me or something. I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm going to make you work 10 times as hard. There is this training montage where this guy just completely exhausts them, just screws with them, just to bother them. There isn't any learning process of, you have to learn to get that. No, he's just screwing with them for the sake of it. There is always that scene in these kinds of movies. And this is a genre that nobody pays attention to. So here's my challenge to you, Magmo. What's the symbolism of that part of the story?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm definitely picking up what you're throwing down. Like if I hear you correctly, and I definitely want to get Michael in here next. But if I hear you correctly, what you're pointing to is the way in which our whole culture's idea of authority has been so misconstrued, and so kind of the well has been so poisoned by our kind of liberal priors that we misunderstand the nature of authority. And this is why we don't easily see the connection between something like or maybe it's better to say that the liberal assumes the absence of a concept like authority in a love relationship, because this was your response to the idea of adding in the lover concept, that we may be in danger of not being able to even properly understand the fact that there is an integration of the lover and the parent and the not just the father but also the kind of general, right? Like the authority. I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, I was brought up to sing. Battle Hymn of the Republic is in my veins, not only because my mom and sister went to UGA, but also because we sang it as a hymn during our liturgy. Southern Baptist liturgy, as low as it may be, still has its rituals. But yeah, so I see you kind of pointing toward this idea of, and I would probably put it maybe a little. I mean, I think you did a wonderful job, but to say it, I would point to it as a possibility, right? That we have failed to understand authority in a way that we're hopeless in understanding love, because we think that there's no aspect of authority present within love.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you, Nico. We've talked for thousands of hours off screen, so it's always pleasantly surprising to me that you think I don't understand what you're saying, but it's mostly due to your accent, not because of the incoherence of your thought. But Michael, get in here, brother. What do you have to say?
Well, I was mostly just trying to take over on Michael duties since Sartaro left.
Yeah. We need a handsome bearded man to keep us in line.
Right.
Please continue.
So in that movie, Major Payne, what was that? Damon Wayans that's doing it. So he's playing a Marine. Now there's a couple of Marine Corps movies that like those of us who went into the Marine Corps would watch. That's not like one we would focus on, but we were usually had watched it. Somebody had watched it because, like, when you're prepping to get in the Marine Corps, you're just like, what am I getting into? And so you're just like watching every movie or something that you could get your hands on. Look, when you get into that and you're in boot camp and stuff, what you hear a lot is, this is not a democracy. This is a dictatorship. Right? Okay, so the obvious thing there is the Marine Corps is a authoritarian dictatorship in fascist form, and necessarily so, right? So people disagreeable like myself, especially at the time, incredibly selfish and disagreeable, struggle because maybe I knew better, right? I'm the rebellious kid within the platoon that goes, oh, well, I know better than what the sergeant, what the corporal, what the whoever's in charge, right, thinks. One of the things that even while I was still in that phase and still in the Marine Corps, that really hammered home for me, even though I struggled to live this out, even though I, in a thinky-talky way could understand it, was, all right, so you get onto the battlefield, like you actually get into an awful situation, right? And all of a sudden, imagine that there's, let's say just 4 of you. Somebody's in charge, right? You're all about the same age, right? It's a bunch of 20-year-olds. And, you're in Iraq, you're in Fallujah or something. It's actually dangerous. There's bombs all over the place. There's snipers on rooftops. There's people just carrying bombs, just for suicide attacks. Okay, well, what do you do? So all 4 people can deliberate, right? Oh, well, here's the best idea. Here's the best idea. But you don't have time for that. You don't have time for deliberation, right? In order to survive that scenario, the way that the Marine Corps talks about it, that is held up over time, is you're more likely to survive if the 3 of you shut up and listen to the guy in charge of the squad. Because if everybody's doing the same thing cohesively as a unit, you're more likely to survive. They might make the wrong choice and you all die. That's absolutely possible. But what we can guarantee you is that if you all sit there and argue about it, right, you're probably going to end up in a real bad situation real fast because you don't have time for that. Okay, so here's this scenario where fascist structures, right, like a kind of male authoritarianness ends up practical and wise even. All right. Now, in order to do that, the people in that squad that are following that squad leader, there has to be love at play, like love for your brother, right? You care about them surviving and you're willing to submit yourself to what that squad leader is saying. So the 3 of you, right, are looking to that guy and going, we're putting down our wills to trust you, right, to try to guide us through this. And then the guy doing it, right, if he's just has some weird selfish ambitions, right, well, he might get them killed. But if he has love in his heart, he has to go, okay, well, what's being executed here? What's the telos of our group or something like that, right? What's the aim? Are we accomplishing that aim? And that aim usually incorporates survival, right? So then he has to have love for who he's responsible to, who's in charge of him, that has issued that order. And he has to have love below him for those following him and their survival and their loyalty. Hey, sure, McBow, not to deliberate on, types of love or something, but what especially in the Marine Corps, what would be held highest is, and like all these like Medal of Honor winners. So I remember going through. I'm gonna tie this together. So types of love, as embodied in the Marine Corps, and what they hold highest, or specifically like an agapic love of putting others higher than yourself. So when we're in training, they take us through this big camp, and there's little stations that you stop at, and each station has a story of some Marine that won like a Medal of Honor, right? So at each one of them, what I remember most, I'm sure there was lots I don't remember, but what stood out to me that I can remember was most of them had like jumped on a grenade, right? So what they do is they have to like pop their helmet off and then go thrust themselves and jump on top of a grenade and try to cover the grenade. When you do that, you know that it'll kill you, right? But that everyone else will survive. So it's like almost a hot potato thing. So everybody's trained to, if you see a grenade, you gotta grab your helmet, go jump on that grenade. Chances are you're not going to make it, but at least your squad survives.
Captain America style.
Sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was an incredible weave, to say the least. And I think that one of the things that, along like what you said, along with what Nico said, is there's a resonance, and I think it's, from a Christian perspective, it's very simple, but there's a depth to it that's striking me at the moment, because God gives us these different images or signs or symbols of himself to us out of necessity, because we can only understand what we can understand, right? But there's a way in which the through line of love in the relationship of father to son, the relationship of the genuinely good master to slave, the relationship between the general or the captain or the corporal to those beneath him, the relationship between husband and wife, the through line in all of these is love, right? And so, of course, John, God is love. It's pointing to this kind of disclosure. And what's interesting to me is the way in which contradiction, or I would want to put it as an absurdity, and this is one of the things I mean when I kind of point to Christian absurdity as a perhaps a useful tool, ecumenically, universally, to understand not only Christ but but humanity, is this way in which the disclosure of God to his children, to his lover, to his soldiers, to his sons, always carries within it this opening, this breaking of the metaphor, where Nico wants to say, basically, we can't understand love because we don't understand authority. And you're pointing to the way in which love is necessary for the utility, or even like for there even to be soldiers. The existence of such a concept kind of requires this kind of telos and this love. For me, that's all pointing to the way in which we are kind of forced to look at the incompleteness of the metaphors that we're able to kind of grok on our way to God. And this is kind of also my response to Al in the comments, bringing up Dasein from Heidegger. Dasein from Heidegger is, when you compare it to this kind of self-revelation of not only the God of the universe, but his particular opinion, which is the ultimate reality of us. And so the Christian is forced to kind of grapple with the ways in which we can't hold all of these together in our minds, right? The fact that he is our lover and our father and our general and our master and our savior and our Lord, like all of this is the absurdity of the freedom within Christ. But the Dasein is merely this kind of reactivity to the fact that we can ponder ourselves in a sense. And so I would want to stray away from Heideggerian language such as the Dasein, because what he does is takes, from my perspective, all of the insights that I've kind of formed my views on most of these things from Kierkegaard, and he's kind of like enclosed them in this kind of Ouroboros of we can't actually or that it's not cool to kind of think of it from this perspective of a personal God, a God who became flesh. Heidegger wants to disincarnate all of the existentialism brought to you by Kierkegaard, and he wants to say that, well, we can kind of come to this conclusion based simply on our fact that we are the types of creatures that can ponder our own existence. And so I get this is one of the reasons why I get triggered by Heidegger. But anyway, any of you guys have any response to what all of the verbal diarrhea I just kind of laid out?
I do. And it relates to some of what you were saying before as well. And that was some of my first inclinations to respond to before I got on the Marine kick, because of the major pain thing. So in Orthodox and Catholic circles, especially like the Thomistic circles, there's a fight going on right now because of a debate about whether Muslims worship the same God. And what the Orthodox circles are trying to reiterate is the importance of the father and son distinction, especially, right? Because, all right, so in so much as there is a union, right? And we have father and son. There's distinctions. We would talk about some essence energy stuff, and I could probably use more proper language, but confusion between a father and a son, that's a problem. I've been wondering if, well, so I was listening to Lord of Spirits, and Father Stephen DeYoung on there was talking about how in Leviticus, it gives us context about nakedness, especially in reference to Noah's nakedness, and that the curse of Canaan has to do with a confusion between the father and the son, as the son effectively and grossly in this context, what the implication is that he tries to what's the word that I want? Well, he has relations with his mother. So the son has relations with his mother. Okay. This is a confusion of identity. This is part of the nakedness problem. Now, if you grant me just enough to work with that, and whether or not that's even laid out there, but if you'll grant it to me. All right. To confuse the son and the father, where a rebellion from the son and the son tries to become the father, obviously that's going to create chaos. I mean, you could imagine this like some kind of weird medieval sort of thing, right? Or some kind of ancient idea of maybe there's the king, right, and his queen, and then the prince, in a way that he is trying to start a rebellion against his father and take his place or something in a very gross way, has relations with the queen, right, in order to get the father out of the picture and to somehow create a different lineage. It's gross. It's awful, right? This is part of why why there's an insistence on men need to leave the home when they're adults, right, and go start their own family, in order to not confuse these identities. Whereas maybe the suspicion might be like within pagan circles, this stuff isn't so common sense, whereas it seems like very common sense to Christians. All right, so that might sound like it's like spreading too far out from the original point, but I'm pretty serious about how this relates, because if we confuse, like, so the way I grew up, right? In a lot of circles I'm in, God, 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 God. We should make this noise all the time. God this, God that, God's will for my life, something, something. Okay. If there's confusion in theory about the nature of the Father, the Son, right, or our relation as the bride to the bridegroom, right, and understanding the Son as the bridegroom, if we mix these identities together and get them confused, there will be chaos. There will be problems. And that's part of what has to be sorted out here.
Nico, what say you?
You know, I don't really know the answer, but maybe it's more than the relation to God. It's the thread that unites all of these other relations, like the parent, master, lover, etc. But it becomes a little hard to imagine, I guess. But I think if you find an example from another part of life, it becomes more understandable. So I don't know if you're familiar with Alexander the Great, but I don't know if the idea of God as the groom was always such an unintelligible thing. Because if you look at that story, it really works out like that. Alexander is the groom, and his army is the bride. So let me give you an example. So you have this army of like battle-hardened veterans, like people that had no trouble at all, just doing butchery things, that been through the worst. They get to the east of Persia, I think it was. And Alexander wants to keep going to India. And up to this point, the army, the soldiers, they've had enough. And what they do is basically they pout and they say that they're not going to move anymore. We're not going anywhere. So consider this. You have all of these battle veteran, grisly veterans, battle-hardened veterans. And instead of they taking the initiative and they going, oh, I'm an alpha male and I'm going to do what I want. Basically what they do is they cry to Alexander, this old beard-wearing Greeks with weapons that are much bigger in size and number than Alexander. They just are complaining and pouting, and we're not going to move any further from this point until you listen to us. Isn't that some, what's going on over there? Isn't there some kind of strange behavior? It's them who follow Alexander. But if these people, you remove them from that context where they're in the army of Alexander, they don't behave like that. They take initiative. So the behavior changes depending on the place.
Nico, do you so let's say I say God is the bridegroom. God is the bridegroom, right? What do I mean? Right. And is it important on whether or not are there, but here, let me phrase that differently. Are there consequences if I see the father as the bridegroom instead of the son? If the image differs, are there consequences?
Yeah.
Well, and this is essentially a problem solved by Islam, right? It's you submit, and you don't worry about basically that I thou relationship, right? It's you submit, and that's all you need to know about love is the submission part of it. And that works for the father, that works for the general, that works for the master. You just submit, you do what you're told, and everything ends up being okay.
So I should listen to my employers at the and listen to their DEI recommendations.
As unto the Lord, right? You serve them as unto the Lord.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, like, but that's the right. I mean, that's the issue, right? Is this kind of we're put in these positions of subordination, and this is also a fairly kind of obvious critique of subsidiarity, right? Is that but it's also addressed to quite directly by at least Paul in Romans that says, you submit to the authorities, and
Yeah.
so you there's this recognition of your place in the hierarchy. But then in the Old Testament, maybe more so in the Old Testament than the New Testament, God seems to reward the type of boldness or the type of, I mean, in Nico's image of the general, these like experienced generals taking the role of the complaining wife, the shadow matriarchy. There does seem to be a sense in which part of recognizing our role and recognizing the distinctions between the different images, I suppose, or identities, you could even call them. Yeah, basically the point I'm trying to make is like that's the same relationship it seemed many of the prophets had with the Lord. And Abraham, pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah, or Moses pleading for the people of Israel, um, et cetera, et cetera. There's this kind of and even in Christ, saying that like when you pray, you should be like the annoying woman who just keeps begging and begging and begging and begging until eventually you know the the guy in charge gets annoyed and does what she asks or addresses the issue. And so yeah, I think that here's what I'll say. I think a lot of what characterizes the online waters we swim in with people like Homath and the Manosphere is trying, and this is why Christianity is so important, or solves all of their issues basically, right? Is because it's in Christ there is neither male nor female, and now wrestle with that for 2,000 years. And also it's like, be mighty men of God, but in your relationship to God, take the role collectively as his bride, and then personally as, um the Song of Solomon, right? Like it's a metaphor, it's an analogy. All of the church fathers kind of agree on that it can't purely be the base level eroticism that people want it to be. It's obviously pointing to this kind of, do you see what I'm saying this kind of feminine relation, this type of I'm in complete need and complete desire, like this scene, and especially in Hosea, but in a lot of the Old Testament and New Testament, Christ saying, if I could just scoop you up like a mother hen. You know, that I think that this type of thing needs to be really wrestled with, especially on the type of manosphere, new conservative Christianity that wants to say, you know, in response to, and I grant this, in response to a culture that has demeaned the value of men and erased, you know, it's been wasp erasure, it's been white man erasure, you know, like it's been masculine erasure. Like this is all I can sympathize with all of that. But I think if Christianity's only telos was to create like strong men that were attractive to virtuous women, so as to make wholesome families that continued the species in you know a wholesome and robust way, then I think that it would be very foolish to you know essentially take in to real understanding all of those quite counterintuitive images and symbols and identities that God seemingly puts us in when he's wishing to disclose himself to us. Does that make sense?
So you know how we're we're told not to use his name in vain, right? I think about the I think like pointing at Hallmath or like Andrew Tate or something like that. I think that's like a super great example, right? And like it kind of parallels with sort of a will to power, you know, who's the strongest sort of thing. And then you got the interesting, you know, critique on that from let's say Peterson, right, where he goes, all right, well, it's not really the strongest, like, or the most powerful, or who could kill the most people, who ends up winning out through like a Darwinistic frame, right? It seems it's a different kind of man that does, right? It's the man that would die for his bride, let's say. Okay, so then what I see out of the Hallmath Andrew Tate problem is I think that they use the name in vain. Now, whether they say the word God or not, and you know, depending on who you're dealing with, they will. But there is a false image that they latch on to. They've lost the Father, right? And the reason why they've lost the Father is because they're in a broken. Their union is broken with the bridegroom, the Son. Right? They're unable to identify the Father because they've broken their union with the Son. Right? So the only way to become someone worthy of being a father to your bride, you know, or being a husband to your bride, and to being a father to your children, the highest form of that, the only worthy form of that, is should you, as a faithful bride, be wedded to the most faithful bridegroom in the Son. And I'm suspecting more and more that where we've lost that image, in all the different ways, that we use his name or a name in vain, is responsible for a lot of this.
Rather than bringing up Kierkegaard again, I'd like to give the floor to Nico. What say you, sir?
Yeah, I think so. It's the missing of the third. I think it is what unites two is the third that has to stand above those. If you don't have the third, you can't unite the two. That's why you can't be neither for men nor for women. You have to be for the thing that is above them. Some people could say, like some atheists could say, it's the family. And yeah, you could do that. But then you're just kicking the can down the road of that. Well, what kind of family? Because everything needs a context, and you just keep going up and up and up until you reach the new thing that needs no context, that is God. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. It's talking about things outside of the context. It's like, imagine a man. Well, that man is dead because you forgot to imagine the air that he needs to breathe. It's something like that.
I do think there's something to that. Obviously, the point being, I got to echo. The point being something like, we obviously shouldn't trust the imagination to be able to supply a 100% reliable image of the God of the universe, right? Like, so I grant you that, but I wonder to what extent that we I don't know, like, I get the sense often that we kind of stop where it's easiest to stop for us, right? That we either stop at the mere kind of assessment of hedonism bad, submission good, or that we stop at the level of judgment in some real sense. When the point that's interesting to me is because it's not, we're not talking about natural law, right? Like, this is my point. Like, in so many ways, the natural law explains so many problems that, you know, folks have these days, right? It's very rational, it's very logical, and almost objective to point to the natural law and say we're missing some things. But I think one of the things that I'm trying for us to effort towards is the actual kind of revelation of God through Scripture, through the church, through tradition, and the sense in which, if all, like, say, you know, it's essentially the idea that, okay, you've mastered the natural law and you see how that solves 99.9% of the problems in your current age, in society, politics, et cetera, et cetera. But there still seems to be this, like, gaping hole, which is primarily the narrow way, i.e., the way, the truth, and the life, i.e., be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And that, so the saint or the Christian is essentially, like, put in this place where what he sees on the outside and how he sees the world going, he can kind of discern from, for reasons of, like, natural law, right and wrong. But that it's a very different thing to kind of grapple with the ways in which it becomes obvious that I don't understand what I'm talking about, because all of the symbols and metaphors given to me are meant to be taken within community. And this was also something that I think you were pointing to, Michael, where it's like, and I think I've said this before, probably better or maybe worse, but it, you know, my father, like, the idea or the concept or the reality of fatherhood, for instance, just to take one of them, gets its identity from God as Father. It's not that God somehow in his essence or in his identity is constrained by the concept of father. It's the fact that we wouldn't have fatherhood, we wouldn't have any, you know, that there's a primary and secondary reality essentially to the metaphors. Yeah. This, of course, the metaphors don't work like someone who's a secularist or a perennialist would think, right? Like, it's not the elephant, the blind men and the elephant kind of a thing. It's this idea that we understand fatherhood from the aspect of God as Father. We understand our submission to our earthly masters out of the authority that was given to Christ through the Father. Like that kind of. Do you see where I'm going with that? That because we misunderstand this kind of essential directionality between God as he discloses himself, not only in reality, in natural law, but also particularly within Scripture, I feel like that should put in us a great humility when discussing essentially all of those secondary relationships, shall we say, and that we should, our understanding of God should have more purchase on our understanding of those lower relationships than our understanding of those relationships have purchase on our understanding of God. Did I stick the landing at all, or am I just a raving madman who's been streaming for too long?
I'm catching whiffs of it, McMall.
Turning religion into a utility.
Say that again.
Yeah.
Turning religion into a utility. Is that where you're going?
Well, I would be afraid of a utilitarian religion, right? That a religion taken for the purposes of getting from A to B, rather than a type of religion that unravels and dismantles the powers of the flesh, the devil, and the world, kind of a thing, right? Like I would be more interested in a religion that, of course, has a telos, but whose ultimate telos is not its mere utility, right? Like, because that becomes kind of what's the word? I can't remember the word, but it basically just refers to itself. It's like a loop, right? Like the point of the religion is to be the religion that is efficient and you can use to your own ends, kind of a thing. But anyway, yeah, Michael, what say you?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that came to mind, funny enough, going back to the Marine Corps thing, what I'm going to try to get at is sonship, but like to get in that space. Okay. So when I'm in the Marine Corps, okay, I don't think this is going to be hard to grasp, even if you like weren't in the service or something, right? So like, here's all these recruits, right? And they get, even, vetted to actually be a service member. You got to go through this boot camp thing. If you make it through, then you're a part of this thing, right? They pin a little thing, Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Okay, you're a Marine now. Great. Now, I was a particularly rebellious Marine. I really wanted to do things my own way, whatever, right? Like I always had sort of one foot out the door by the time I got in. And I stayed that way for most of it. There was a little bits where, maybe I'd try harder than other times, but I kind of had one foot out the door the whole time. But some guys were like super dependable and really about it, right? And just like, they're the commanding officers or their whoever's in charge of them, their NCOs, whatever, knew that they could count on that guy, and he was an exemplary Marine, a really good example, something. Now, insofar as that guy wasn't just like going through the motions in order to I don't know, like get promoted or whatever, but his heart was really in it, and so were his works, right? His whole self, like actually really loyal, genuinely. Then that kind of guy has a sonship that I didn't have. Now, I was part of the children of this thing, right? I'm part of the greater body, but that's different than really being all in, right? And so when Paul is talking about the agios, the saints. The picture that I see out of that I think is a little bit harder for us to understand from a lot of our backgrounds, especially mine, was, okay, look, you could like sort of be inducted into this thing, and you know, you got the badge, right? You've been pinned, right? You're a Christian, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're chasing after this sonship, that you're the one that's like really all in, not for some utilitarian means. Your whole heart, all your actions, your entire life, everything that you do, right? But the people that are, Paul is saying, those agios, you know, in that level and that kind of deep sonship will be lifted up above what we've been lifting up in the pagan gods, Zeus, Athena, whatever, these demons, right? And so they, and you know, the Caesars, right, that are declaring themselves gods, we're going to lift up those who were part of this faithful bride, like really have the sonship within the bride. They're going to be lifted up instead. We're going to remember their names, right? And we're going to recognize that they are at that sonship, at that loyalty, you know, because they will bear the image of the Son. Right. So understanding that distinction, right, ends up part of a crucial hierarchy in what we're a part of and the spiritual battle that we're actually in.
Okay, I'm kind of lost.
So the reason why that relates to me, okay, is what I got out of what McMullen was saying, right? Between, you know, concerns about utilitarianism, or, you know, are we, you know, as Christians, are we just the saints? It's like, look, only the Father knows. Only the Father knows your heart and how deep you are into this. But it will actualize, and there will be actual fruits. We do see, like, unlike me, I'm just like some chief of sinners. Right? This is not me. I have nothing to boast about. But you know, when you encounter someone that is really faithful, is genuinely faithful, right, in the fullness of faithfulness, man, that's a stark contrast from the folks that might be there for utilitarian means, right? That just sort of, but these, and then maybe to like take one step further. I mean, this is all I've got to relate to what McMullen was getting at. But yes, those roles that we see, right? Like, what's a good father? How does that father help us understand the Father? Yeah, they're like symbols and pointers. They're certainly not all encompassing, but they're images that allow us to point our hearts in a way to bear the full image. So, and as far as any of that lands, by all means, but if it doesn't, I think that's the best way I have to communicate it.
Yeah, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yeah, there is something about sonship that seems primary, and also like, yeah, I think you're also helping us not to forget the reality of, like, we find ourselves in a spiritual war, right? Like this, it's yes, sons, yes, lovers, yes, servants, but also we do find ourselves within this situation of spiritual warfare. But with that, I do want to invite all of us to kind of give our final thoughts. And I want to paint a little bit of a picture of the conversation as I see it, to just kind of maybe jog all of our memories about the conversation, and just to kind of help us form final thoughts. But it's interesting to me that this all started with Tunji recommending us watch this kind of thing on expertise and elites and taste, and that kind of parlayed quite nicely into this idea of, basically discernment or judgment of quality, right? Like almost discernment of the good could be a description of kind of what we were going over at those first stages. But then I think there was a real turn that happened when we started talking, when Nico brought up the image of the difference between masters and slaves and what they look at. They're the center of their attention. And that kind of brought about this question of like, well, we're supposed to be servants of Christ, but looking down, that is to say, looking within ourselves, seems to be the opposite of helpful, or at least to the point of when we look at ourselves, it's a very difficult time. We have a very difficult time not getting lost in what I like to call sin consciousness, right? And just the kind of unbearable weight, either of our freedom to do the good and the bad, or of our inability, our slavery to our passions, our slavery to the influence and temptation of the world and the devil. And so I think that through the rest of the conversation, we were trying to really drill down on some maybe useful insights from all of these different metaphors and the ways in which love, submission, authority kind of works itself out in these different real life circumstances that God himself has given us to point towards himself. And then I think we've landed in a fairly nice place, and I do need to upload the beat that I've made, which I think is right along with this. I think we've had a pretty near perfect kumbaya stream here. Not many disagreements, or at least we haven't dwelt on the disagreements, even though me and Nico could probably, if there's a hunger out there for real disagreement, I'm sure between an Orthodox, a Catholic, and a heretic Protestant autodidact who doesn't think about what he says before he says it, I'm sure we could get into trouble. But what I'm trying to say is I think we've done a really good job, and I want to hear final thoughts, maybe first from Nico and then from Michael, and then I'll maybe have a little something to say after that. But yeah, this has been great fun. I need to upload this beat. I forgot to say, this is the beat I teased on Twitter. I think that we might have gotten close to doing what I was trying to do, which is blend this kind of Italian disco summer vibes that people like Matt Krotz and Cale Zeldin are trying to promote. This Italian culture, like maybe the problem with Rome is that they've forgotten they're Italians. Mixed in, blended with this Anglican chant, these heretic Protestant innovators actually performing traditional, ritualistic, liturgic, worshipful singing in English. All right. So I've done my spiel. Nico, what say you, sir?
I didn't know. I don't really know anything about that Italian disco. Maybe I should look more into it.
You should. You look like an aficionado. You look like a creator of Italian disco.
No, really. Maybe I should get acquainted. But I guess all of that happened on X, or previously known as the artist Twitter. And I don't hang around those places very often. But on the topic, I think the most interesting thing was this kind of going from one thing to the other, rather than concentrating on any one of the topics that we went into. What to me the most interesting thing is that we started with the Fuji video, how all of those things are connected.
Pretty cool. I agree. Michael, last words, and feel no need to rush. I still have to bounce this thing.
Sure.
And so if you end too soon, then I'm gonna be kind of caught with my pants down here, and I'm gonna have to scramble. So feel free to lay out your final thoughts. No word count limit. Go off, King.
Thankfully, no one accuses me of being brief, usually. there's been this ongoing anxiety that is heightened, which I've felt before about a rise in a kind of masculine authoritarianism, right, in response to liberalism or kind of the communist thing that we sort of found ourselves in. But a different kind of authoritarianism. But man, it wasn't that long ago before when I was like taking on the label of anti-fascist and punch Nazis and all this. That wasn't that long ago for me. That was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I bared that image for the better part of 15, 20 years. So, I find myself steel manning a lot of what Jonathan Pageau is saying, which is from our Orthodox circles, we're not saying like, yay, necessarily. We're going, we can see it coming, right? That because the thing we're in is so old, that we sort of, and especially like some of the circles that we've been in, like whether it's Arabic circles that got conquered by Islam, or the how communism rose up out of Russia, and the sort of fascism that turned into with Stalin. Okay, like we can sort of see the we can see what's playing out, right? Now here part of the good news that we're offering here, that we're trying to get at, like, and part of what sonship and bearing the image of that sonship looks like is like, bless those who curse you, right? You're in the world, not of the world. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So, I think about my Palestinian godfather, okay? His family, as far as he knows, like he was born in Bethlehem. As far as he knows, his family's been there at least 2,000 years. They've been through some weird shit, some real weird shit. And, there's going to be tribulations. Tribulations are going to come up, right? We don't have control over the world, right? But to let go of the anxiety, put the anxiety down, right, and set your eyes on Christ. Because the only way that you'll drown in all of this is if you take your eyes off of Christ, right? That's when we sink, right? Versus setting our eyes on him and somehow rising above it. So that's good news, right? That's evangelion. That's hope. That's a gospel.
I'm once again reminded of James. Count it all joy, brothers, when you experience various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and steadfastness, having its full effect, produces the righteousness of God. So that was the most preacher voice I think I've ever gotten on the hot stream, the cookout. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you, Michael and Nico specifically. Also, shouts out to the other Michael and to Yoav and to Chris Howard, who joined shortly. Thanks to everyone in the Hive Mind, making us feel, you guessed it, virtually not alone. Let's send them off. Here's the Anglican chant mixed with the Italian disco, with probably like some of us, participating in Dialogos. That's what I would say, which would be the sample of our audio. So enjoy it, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye. And I'll play the music and then play the new branding brought by Ups. And I got to make sure everybody can hear it, because that's important.
joy of health of your person, we may be always become sweet and safe from all evil, as we all praise the blessed hope and the coming of our Savior Jesus Christ.